Hello, my friends. UFC Vegas 80 weigh-in reaction video. All fighters have taken to the scales. All fighters have made weight. We've got 11 fights scheduled to take place tomorrow. And we saw the hoop come out for Karolina Kovalevich. We saw a few fighters who looked horrific on the scales. And a couple of the fighters, it was their second time actually looking pretty rough on the scales. We also had the first fighter to the scale, Bobby Green, and the final fighter to the scale ended up being Felipe Lins, and both of them made weight. So let's walk through the weigh-ins and what we saw. A few little takeaways here and there. Thank you for tuning in, taking time out of your Friday early afternoon to indulge here. By the way, if you wouldn't mind taking the time to subscribe to the channel as well as like the video. We've been putting out a tremendous amount of content on a regular basis, and I'm going to continue to do so. We actually went up with a play during or right after weigh-ins this morning, and let's get right to it. So let's chat a little bit about what we saw. One of the fighters who's taking place in the first fight of the night, we've got Montana De La Rosa taking on JJ Aldrich. I got to say, De La Rosa looked great on the scales, looked like she had a little bit of muscle. Didn't seem to be an issue with the cut. And Aldrich, she still has that deer in the headlights look. This is a very talented fighter who spent a lot of time in Colorado working her way up and down the ladder now. You saw the odds swing significantly towards Montana De La Rosa here. And I do think that she should be the favorite in this spot. I know De La Rosa's been dealt a pretty rough hand through the years. Tatiana Suarez is a tough draw, man. So that was an interesting matchup. Then you had Arichi Lang taking on Johnny Munoz, and you watch both of those fighters. No real issues that stood out to me on the scale in that matchup. Both fighters looked solid. They look like they're ready to partake in the action tomorrow. Thank you for joining the stream. I see folks are starting to pile in here. So that fight, interesting as far as an odds perspective go. That second fight, Johnny Munoz against Arichi Lang. You have a fighter in Munoz who has faltered and he doesn't look like he's been taking shots very well. Goes to his back, often pulls guard, and Arichi Lang looked like he's ready to go to war. Could be a recipe for disaster in that matchup. Then the third fight of the night, we had the return of Kanako Murata. Murata, it took a while for her to get to the scale. She ended up making weight and wasn't really an issue. And Vanessa Demopoulos made the weight, 115 pounds. Looks like Demopoulos could be fighting down at 105 pounds. Very diminutive frame for the division. Nothing major stood out in that bout. I'll be avoiding that fight from a betting perspective. That could be a Mimi show on full display in that matchup. Then we had, this is the bout that a lot of folks are probably tuning in for right now. We had Nate Maness taking on Mateus Medonc. Medonc came in at 125 or so pounds. Neither of these fighters missed weight, but the clear takeaway here is that Nate Maness, man, he is sucked out once again. I know he made the weight. This is the second time he's made flyweight. First time Mateus has made flyweight, but you could see even when these fighters faced off, that is a fighter who is emaciated, and he's going to have, granted, over 24 hours to put the weight back on. But I have concerns for Nate Maness here. I know he's a significant underdog, and he's a tough fighter. Sometimes these fighters are using a lot of their toughness to get through this weight cut, and that could potentially drain them during the fight. So I wish we had better odds, I got to be honest, on Mateus Madoc, and I would be firing away here. It's a little too wide of a line for my liking, though, especially for a fighter who's making their first trip down to flyweight. You never know how fighters are going to perform going up or down a division, but usually when they drop down a division, it's not a good sign. How's it going, boys? Great to see you on board. Nate looked like a tweaker. Yeah, you could say that. It looked like he spent a lot of sleepless nights getting ready for this, but he's here nonetheless. Then you had the next fight, Karolina Kowalkiewicz, KK, who needed the hoop of shame, and she made the weight. That wasn't really an issue. It seemed like she was haggard on the scales. Looks like she put a lot of work in to make the weight, but she was able to do so. And then Diana Belbita, no issues there. No issues on the scale. Looked solid, ready to go. And both of these fighters ended up, when they squared off, it was a cordial face-off. No real animosity towards one another. In fact, they posed for the camera. You want to talk a little animosity, though? Look at the next matchup here, where you had Felipe Lins, who, although he was the last fighter to the scale, he ended up making weight. Not much of an issue there. Seemed cut up, ready to go. The lower half of his body, though, I knew he's closing in on 39 years of age. Seems like this cardio situation, it could come to a head here, especially when we get in there against Iwan Cutelaba, who's going to be pushing a pace. You know, he's hell on wheels, Cutelaba, right off the bat. And Cutelaba made weight. Didn't look like the same fighter, though. I know he shaved off his beard, and he tried to get into Felipe Lins' face. Another thing you'll see, Iwan Cutelaba, the shape of his face has changed throughout the course of his career. His nose has been getting smashed in, and he's been through the grinder. He's been losing a bunch of fights, granted coming off the win over Tanner Boser, but Cutelaba looked solid on the scales. This fight, though, you could see right off the bat, these two, Felipe Lins looked to be on the defensive during the stare down, and I believe these two are going to end up trading early and often. Only one man will be left standing. I think Lins, as an underdog, is worth a shot here. Next up, this is another fight that a lot of folks have had circled on their fridge for a while. Bill Algeo taking on Alexander Hernandez. I can speak to this. I originally made a play on Bill Algeo earlier in the week, much earlier in the week, and I ended up hedging on Alexander Hernandez. The primary reason for doing that, I know that Bill Algeo takes him a while to get going, and he usually is somebody who overcomes adversity in fights. And you listen to the media day interviews by Alexander Hernandez. Seemed like there was a moment of enlightenment there, and the way he talked about letting his last fight against Billy Q, making it much more difficult than he had to. Yes, he was winning that first round pretty handily against Billy Q, but then fell off of a cliff. Alexander Hernandez, that is, looked great, making 145 pounds. Granted, I mean, it looks like his pharmacist and nutritionist, the doctors that are working with him, really have gone to bat and done a number for him at featherweight. He looks phenomenal. And on the other side of the fight, Bill Algeo looked great. No issues making weight there. These two had I don't want to say, it wasn't an icy stare down. I mean, they know exactly what they're there to do. So they're going to get down to business tomorrow. I'm going to be pulling for Bill Algeo. Granted, I ended up playing both sides of this fight, and it's pretty much a wash for me. But I will be pulling for Bill Algeo, no doubt about it. I see Alexander Hernandez as a front runner, and he is breakable. And if anybody can do it, it can also be Bill Algeo. So going to be pulling for him, but you know, Hernandez is very dangerous. Next up, we had Drew Dober against Ricky Glenn. Drew Dober, what can you say? This guy, when you go back to the California Athletic Commission, you can look and see what weights these fighters ended up, their hydration levels, where they got to, and their weights before they stepped into the octagon. He traditionally has put on massive amounts of weight between weigh-ins and fight day. So I suspect that'll happen again. I was at Drew Dober's last fight against Matt Frivola, looked enormous. I had great seats for that fight. And granted, he got knocked out in that fight, but here against Ricky Glenn is one tough customer. You could see the size difference. I know Drew Dober has tree trunks for legs, but as far as height and lankiness, Ricky Glenn is massive. Then we had this is a fight where I ended up making a play, so this is important to mention. Alex Morono taking on Joaquin Buckley. Buckley looked great on the scales. One of the first fighters to the scales. Has a lot of energy, and also we've seen in his fights, if he doesn't get knocked out, this kid can push a pace. And he's still pretty young in his career, and he's taking on an Alex Morono, who I tweeted this earlier in the week. Alex Morono is very coachable, got great coaching team from Team Fortis, is a cerebral fighter, but he also can get sucked into firefights, and he's not athletic. So there's a chance that he potentially could get knocked out here. And that's what I suspect is going to happen. I know that Morono, we've seen against Semmelsberger and others, he can come out the other side victorious, but against a dynamic fighter in Buckley, who's going to be darting in and darting out and going for it, especially power shots, I suspect. And I made a play on Buckley at minus 165, a 1.5 unit play. So that's something that stood out. And one of the dividends of watching these weigh-ins is you get to see Morono looked horrific on the scales. I know he's looked bad in the past and he's barely made it, but he got toweled down and he had his hands on his knees and he's looking around. Granted, he may perform well inside the octagon, but the loss to Ponzinibbio is beyond Ponzinibbio's shelf life ended a long time ago. And look what happened. Look what happened there. It took one or two shots, and Morono's face was contorted, and he ended up getting knocked out against the cage. I think that may happen here. Next up, we had Joe Pyfer taking on Abdul Razak Al Hassan, and this was a fight. This was a stare down, and something that really stood out to me was Pyfer. The length of his neck, it is enormous, and reminds me in a way of a giant version of Kyle Nelson. Even in the way he fights, he goes for the kill. I know Nelson's been going to decision recently, but I don't think this fight's going to a decision. And Abdul Razak Al Hassan, 185, he is forced to be reckoned with for a few minutes. And I don't think this fight's going to last very long, but both of these guys, when they stared each other down, you could see the big time size difference here. Abdul Razak Al Hassan is someone who typically fights at welterweight, and here he is at 185 pounds, and he's got a tough test ahead of him against someone in Joe Pyfer, and everybody says, be like Joe Pyfer. That's got to be in the back of Joe Pyfer's mind, and he's going to take some risks out there. I think somebody's going down here, but interesting matchup. And you saw Pyfer, that neck, huge neck on Pyfer, should make an interesting target if Al Hassan lands there or lands on the chin. Maybe a situation where timber happens. And then we had the main event of the evening, Grant Dawson and Bobby Green. Both of these fighters were right off the bat, the first few fighters to weigh in. And the thing that stood out to me, both of them looked great on the scales, although Bobby Green looked a little bit more sucked out than he typically does. And you see Grant Dawson, no issues there. But something that stood out to me after these fighters weighed in, they had the stare downs. And Bobby Green, I know he mentioned this during the pre-fight media day interviews, that he saw a video of Grant Dawson inside the octagon saying his name and acting as if he was, I believe, boxing or doing something, striking inside the octagon for a promotional video. And Bobby Green got upset about that and waited until they stared down at weigh-ins to discuss what took place. So, Pepe, good to see you. Thank you for joining the stream here as we just do a brief recap of the weigh-ins that we took in. And what I was getting at here is you had Bobby Green, who confronted Grant Dawson and mentioned straight to his face, don't be using my name if I'm not here. Just wait until I'm here if you're going to do that. And Grant Dawson kept interrupting him and saying, I know you're a nice guy. I sent you messages when I was this tall. And Grant Dawson, I could see he's trying to figure out his opponent from a mental perspective. He sees that Bobby Green has to find a way to get under his opponent's skin and get angry about getting ready for war, basically. And that's what will likely happen tomorrow. I played Fight Doesn't Go the Distance, and 5 rounds, 25 minutes with Grant Dawson is a very long time. And Bobby Green, we know if he gets into a flow state, which is going to be difficult for him, then all bets are off. But if Grant Dawson's in there and has control time, he's been a suffocating grappler. And you're right, the art of war. I see that. You know, you bring up a great point, because now I bet Dawson's going to be thinking about this, all night and in the lead up to the fight, and it's going to be in his head. So he may burn an extra few calories between now and fight night because of there's a fire that's been lit, obviously, but it makes the fight a little bit more interesting. You should have some more viewers tuning in tomorrow. And by the way, tomorrow morning, I'll be doing my Fight Morning Quick Card Breakdown show on my YouTube channel right here. So thank you for tuning in. That's the weigh-in recap video. Wanted to keep this under 20 minutes. And looks like we're going to do that. So I have a few plays up if you want to check my BetMMA.tips profile. And we're continuing to do this one fight card at a time, year after year, month after month, day after day. Go get what's yours. Let's do it.